Thanks to our sponsors, Hit Point Press. Check out their big bad bundles. Link in the description below. All right, guys, Jameson and Alex here. Today we're going to be going over all of the details, overview, and our thoughts on Spelljammer and the 3 components that go along with that, which is the Adventurer's Guide, the Astral Menagerie, and the Light of Xaryxis adventure. So, give a breakdown of all those things and our thoughts. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to be entered in our D&D Beyond Players Bundle giveaway.
Free stuff is wonderful.
Of course, but all that being said, let's just get straight into it. I think the biggest thing to hit off on here is the character options, which is the main focus of the Adventurer's Guide.
It's kind of our cup of tea.
Exactly. There are 2 new backgrounds, which there's not really much going on with those. They're pretty simple, basic, kind of going along with the new theme of giving you a feat.
Yeah.
With those that are themed for the adventure, which is fine. But the real big thing on here is the races.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do is go through the races, compare the current version to the Unearthed Arcana version, and the changes, and just our thoughts of those, and how they end up doing what they did.
Yep.
So, first up.
Yep. You got the Astral Elf. So, a additional variation on the regular elf as far as, sides, the speed, movement, all that thing. The Fey Ancestry, keen senses, all that stuff's normal. Things a little bit more interesting is you have the Astral Fire, which did not change from the UA. You're still getting access to some extra cantrips that are your choice of a spellcasting ability of Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. So, extra cantrips as far as that goes. Still getting Dark Vision. That's nothing changed there. One of the other major changes is you're losing the Radiant Soul ability effect that was there, and instead getting the Starlight Step.
Yeah.
Which is, as a bonus action, you can manage to teleport up to 30 feet to an occupied space you can see. Use this trait a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. So, like Misty Step.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of thing for... Again, as a bonus action.
Yeah, as a racial ability, it's pretty solid.
It's pretty good.
And the other one that you kind of traded for this, essentially, in the final version is Radiant Soul, which is basically just a way to regain some hit points.
Right.
Which I would much rather have some pseudo Misty Step than have a couple hit points here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing, too, with the Astral Trance, it's the typical you don't have to sleep thing. But when you do finish the trance, you gain a skill proficiency with a weapon or tool of your choice. Originally, in the UA, it was 2 proficiencies, not 1.
So yeah, 1 weapon and 1 tool. So it was like 1 of each side. You couldn't do 2 of one side or whatever.
Right.
Still.
So now it's just you get 1. So they just toned that down a little bit, but then they gave you a crazy teleport that you can do, which, I mean, I'll take it. Oh, and one other thing, too, is at the very top, they put you're also considered an elf for any prerequisite or effect that requires you to be an elf.
Right, because there are some feats out there that require you to be elves. And I assume there's going to be more of that to come with there's these old level 1 feats are coming down with 1D&D and the future of that. Seems very likely to come up.
Yes.
Next up is the Auto-Gnome race. I think probably my personal favorite.
Fair.
Well, anyway.
They're interesting.
Not a ton of significant changes on here. You still have your armored casing, making your base armor class 13 plus your dex. The Built for Success thing is probably my favorite ability on here, which is kind of like a small bardic inspiration kind of thing. You're getting a D4 to attack, ability check, or saving throw, or as they call that, a D20 test.
Oh, yeah.
Is the new terminology they'll be using for that moving forward. Anyway. And it gets a number of uses per your proficiency bonus per long rest. And again, I do love that's been the shifting change away from you're a modifier, because you could cap your modifier soon and you can cap your proficiency. So it seems really, really good early, but once that's hit, it's gone. So you don't get that continued thing. You do, however, you get some extra spells that you normally wouldn't have access to as far as them affecting you. Right. With the healing machine, because a mending spell can heal you a little bit because you're a construct. But normally constructs are unaffected by a lot of healing magic, like Cure Wounds, Healing Word, Mass Cure Wounds, Mass Healing Word, and Spare the Dying now can all actually be used effectively on you, which makes sense. Because it would be terrible if you're in a party and you're playing one of these and somebody's like, oh, Mass Cure Wounds, everybody gets 25 health.
Except you, because you're a construct.
You get nothing.
Right. So, and the only change really to this from the UA was they added Mass Cure Wounds and Mass Healing Word.
Which makes complete sense. It'd be weird that the single target stuff works, but the group stuff doesn't.
Right. Going along with that, you still have Mechanical Nature, which is resistance to poison, damage and immunity to disease, and advantage on saves against being paralyzed or poisoned, and you don't need to eat, drink, or breathe. And then Sentry's Rest, you don't have to sleep, you just have to be inactive for 6 hours if you remain conscious. And then lastly, you gain 2 tool proficiencies of your choice. So just some extra utility. I mean, you're like R2-D2, you know, you got your little gadgets and stuff that come out of your body and do some stuff.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Now we start getting into the weird stuff because we have the GIF.
This is probably one of the most changed ones.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question there. The GIF are the hippo-like creatures, you know, think like tabaxi or like slender cats. We have GIFs or bipedal hippo people. Their speed size doesn't necessarily change, but they had the damage dealer effect taken away, which basically let them reroll damage on melee attacks. Damage die, that is, if they rolled a 1.
Right.
That's gone. Instead, now we have Astral Spark, which your psychic connection to the astral plane allows you to mystically access a spark of divine power, which you can use to channel through your weapons. When you hit a target with a simple or martial weapon, you can cause the target to take extra force damage equal to your proficiency bonus. Use trade a number of times equal proficiency bonus. Again, can't do so more than once per turn. So if you had like multi-attacks, you can't go like just wallop somebody a bunch of times, and then you gain all XP used to finish a long rest. So it's a little bit of burst damage that you can only do a few times a day, but is what it is.
It is force damage, so,
so
I'll take it.
One of the best damage types in the game, if not the best damage type. And then here's the other thing. Firearms Mastery. You have a mystical connection to firearms that traces back to the gods of the GIF, who delighted in such weapons. You have proficiency with all firearms and ignore the loading property of any firearm. In addition, attacking at a long range with a firearm doesn't impose disadvantage on your attack roll.
Yeah, it's kind of like the feat. You just kind of get the free firearms feat built into your race.
But it's one of those things like if you're not using firearms in your campaign,
right,
this feels bad.
Yeah, you wouldn't take this.
You just wouldn't take it
you
because and then the hippo build thing allowing you to have advantage on strength-based ability checks and saving throws, and you count as one size larger for carrying and pushing, dragging, lifting things. That's still the same.
Right. So some little stuff on there, but yeah, again, as Alex was saying, if you're not using firearms,
feels bad.
I mean, you could maybe work with your DM and just have it be kind of like a sharpshooter replacement, which might be a little bit strong.
Yeah. Or maybe if you...
Or like without the +10, like you can ignore cover or something.
Or maybe the firearms thing becomes like bows instead. If you're not allowing anything, you could make the argument
flavor it
is to be like, okay, short and long bows, crossbows, any kind of a bow instead of a gun kind of thing. Yeah. We're trying to help out the...
You're still having fun. Yeah. So don't be so stuck to the rules all the time.
That's right.
Now where things get probably the most wild and the most ridiculous that they actually allowed these things to happen, which is the Hidozi.
Yeah.
So with them, they still are, humanoid, medium or small, 30-foot walking and climbing speed. Dexterous feet. There's a little bit of semantics change on here, but as a bonus action, you use your feet to manipulate an object, such as open or close a door or container, or pick up or set down a tiny object. It was a bonus action for the use an object action.
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing.
Just more clarification.
Yeah, it might be like a slight nerf because use an object is maybe a little bit more broad versus this. I mean, it's more specific. It doesn't say such as, it just says those things. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of gray area, but it is what it is on there. Then glide, which is, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
If you're not incapacitated or wearing heavy armor, you can extend your skin membrane and glide. When you do so, you can perform the following aerial maneuvers. You move 5 feet horizontally for every 1 foot you descend in the air at no movement cost to you. Get that to that in a second. And then when you would take damage from a fall, you can use your reaction to reduce the fall's damage to 0. So originally...
I don't have a strong problem with the fall damage thing. It makes sense. You can glide stuff. Like that's not the concern we have.
Right. So... the big issue here is that they added the at no movement cost to you, because originally that was not in the UA.
Yes.
So they added that on there. And the problem is, if you move 5 feet for every 1 foot you descend, you just jump 1 foot and now you get 5 free feet. Say that 5 times fast. Of movement, which is if you have 30-foot movement speed, you now have 150-foot movement speed as long as you just like hop and glide, hop, glide, hop, glide, hop, glide. Obviously, if you're actually thinking about it, from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense because a turn is 6 seconds.
Yeah.
How many times can you jump and glide? Like, gliding takes time.
Yeah, it's slow.
But they should have added, like, some kind of minimum height distance. Like, if you jump, if you fall 10 feet,
there's no
glide.
such thing as, like, jumping 1 foot and then gliding for 5. Like, that's...
Right. Like, how is that even...
There's not enough... I mean, there's not enough time for wind to get in there to actually have you glide that far. Unless you're, like...
It's more like you're, like, going sideways than gliding down. You know, it's against the intentions.
Yes.
And that was fully brought on themselves with the wording they used, I think. They should probably have... I will not be surprised if they add some kind of errata to this. Yeah. Just because it's definitely not the intention to be able to do that. And I think most DMs will be like, hey guys, like, clearly this is not the intention. That will probably be changed. There should probably be some kind of limitation, or maybe it's like when you're falling from a certain height, like if you're over a certain, 10 feet or 20 feet, because then it's going to use more movement to get up there to do that. So I don't know, maybe there's some ways they can work that in there, or it's like a once per turn thing they could throw in there, so you could jump like a high jump, but then you can only do that once a turn, so you will get extra movement, but it is what it is. So that's definitely weird. And then of course they decided to, because we buffed that, let's give them another free ability, because why not? So you have resilience. When you take damage, you can use a reaction to roll a d6, add your proficiency bonus to the number, reduce the damage you take by the amount equal to the total, and you can use that number of times equal to proficiency per long rest. So, it's kind of like a weaker version of Uncanny Dodge. I mean, you're reducing the damage in a way to Uncanny Dodge, but for lower damage, it's probably actually better.
Yep.
Like if you're only going to take 5 damage, like at level 1 or something, you could potentially completely take 0 damage, versus Uncanny Dodge would only do half of that.
Right.
So, and of course, you don't even have Uncanny Dodge at level 1 anyways.
Right.
So, it's interesting. Alternative defensive option. So, because flying isn't enough. Gliding isn't enough.
Yeah, quick, careful. It is specifically gliding. Right. There is no, like, flying, take off, and go built into the race.
This ain't no Rockborn Ranger.
That's right. Check out that. We ain't doing that crap. No air Cocra either.
Yeah.
No flying speeds. Anyway, onto the ooze creature type of the Plasmoid. Definitely one of the more unique things. Again, not a ton changing except for a couple of clarification things. You're still amorphous, so you can squeeze through very small spaces. You have dark vision. You can hold your breath for an hour. You are resistant to both poison and acid damage. The acid resistance there is interesting because that's more unique. Yeah. An advantage on saving throws against being poisoned. And here's the clarification stuff: is the shape self ability. Originally, it said you could change how or your one head, one arm, 2 arms, legs, how your limbs come off of there. Was no action required, but now it does say as an action you can reshape your body to give yourself a head, 1 or 2 arms, 1 or 2 legs, makeshift hands and feet, or you can revert to a limbless blob. While you have a human-like shape, you can wear clothing and armor made for a humanoid of your size. As a bonus action, you can extrude a pseudopod that is up to 6 inches wide and 10 feet long, or reabsorb it into your body. As part of the same action, you can use pseudopod to manipulate an object, open or close a door, container, pick up an object, set down a tiny object. And it contains no sensory organs and can't activate magic items or lift more than 10 pounds. So it's strictly a, RP-based thing, exploration-based feature.
For the most part. Yeah. And they did clarify, too, on there that it just said originally as a bonus action you can extrude a pseudopod, but then they added that as part of the same bonus action, that line there. Yeah. So it's not like it's every time you do it, you have to use a bonus action. It's not like you do it one time and then now you just have this free extra blob that goes around. So I think that was just a clarification thing on there, just to let you know that you have to use a bonus action every time you want to interact. You can't just have that extra tentacle thing flailing around once you use one bonus action. Mm-hmm. And then lastly on here we have the Thry-Kreen, which is another interesting option on here. Mm-hmm. Which, you're a monstrosity. Very, interesting to have these weird creature types, because there are some weird things that happen with spells and whatnot. Yep. So, something to keep in mind all the time, especially some of those higher level spells can affect certain types of creatures. Mm-hmm. Size, medium or small, 30-foot walking speed, chameleon carapace. While you aren't wearing armor, you have a base AC of 13 plus dex, and then as an action, you can blend into the surroundings, giving you advantage on dex stealth checks and to hide in those surroundings, which makes sense. You're kind of blending in. Chameleon carapace is the name of it, so it is what it is. Dark vision, same. Secondary arms, they did make some semantic changes on here. You have two slightly smaller secondary arms below your primary pair of arms. Secondary arms can manipulate an object. It's the same, they use the same phrase.
Yeah.
Object door, pick up a tiny object, wield a weapon that has a light property. That's the difference with this one, is it can wield a weapon, but it has to be light. And with the difference on here, they had it originally, is they had a line that it functions just like your primary arms with the exceptions, which is it can wield a weapon with light property, but can't use it to wield other kinds, which is just overly wordy, I think.
Yeah.
And then they had a thing on there about you can't wield a shield or secondary arm, which if you can only wield light weapons, it's just extra words. Yeah. So they just kind of condensed it down a little bit there and simplified it just for ease of reading, I think.
Yep.
And then they have sleepless. You don't have to sleep. So there's that. And then the telepathy is the same as the UA, which you can willingly communicate with creatures that are open to it. 120 feet to yourself. Contacted creature doesn't need to share a language, but must be able to understand at least one language. The link is broken if you and the creature move more than 120 feet apart, if either of you is incapacitated, or if either of you breaks the connection mentally with no action required. So yeah, some really interesting races on here. It's, in my opinion, probably the strongest thing about the entire set of books is these races. Though they are a little bit outlandish for maybe some campaign settings. So
yes, for sure.
So yeah, DM dependent for sure if you want to do some stuff that's outside of the Spelljammer setting. But they do have, one of the things I do like about this book, which I'll get into a little bit later on, is they do make it so that you can build this kind of space, wild space setting into any campaign. And I'll get to that when we get to the adventure side of things. But some other quick things to touch on. In the Adventures Guide, which is, spelljamming, which is basically magical ship control, flying space arcane ships. Yeah. So there basically is the pilot who has to be a spellcaster, which is important, and they have to attune to like the helm basically, or the chair that flies the ship. So to go along with that, there's 3 magic items that kind of go along with being, a spelljammer that are in the book, which, I mean, if you're not using the spelljammer ships, then these magic items aren't going to do anything for you. They also add 2 new spells, which are interesting. One of them gives you an air bubble, which could be useful in other, things.
For swimming purposes, water, yeah.
So, but the other one is, create spelljammer helm. So that, again, is tied directly to the setting. So if you're looking at this book to get stuff outside of the races for the Adventures Guide, there's not really a whole lot going on here. Nope. They do talk more about the actual vessels themselves and how combat works with the ships. A little bit of lore for the main central hub city is in here as well. But other than that, I mean, the magic items are pretty much irrelevant. There's basically 1 spell, which is okay. So really, if you're looking at it as a player, if you want some extra races, I mean, that's really all you're getting from this as a player. Sure. The rest of it is all for the DM, which we'll get to in the Menagerie and the adventure part. Yeah. In the Menagerie, there are a lot of interesting creatures on here, but we wanted to just touch a couple that we really enjoyed. I'll go first on mine.
Oh, okay.
I think my favorite thing on here is probably the lunar dragons, because
it's dungeons.
It's Dungeons and Dragons, right? And
I do love the fact that it's solar and lunar dragons. I think that fits with
celestial
the
kind of.
It's very nifty.
Stars.
I do like that.
Yeah, they have some. Well, it's kind of like a white dragon to an extent. It's got like a cold breath, 90-foot cone, all that. I'm looking at the ancient, of course, because if you're looking at dragons, you gotta look at the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't care about that wormling.
Yeah, it's got some burrow, fly, typical stuff. Legendary actions, difficult terrain. Making difficult terrain with a dragon can cause for some real hard times, especially when they have a 90-foot cone. And then wing attack is pretty normal on there. But the bonus action, dragon becomes partially incorporeal for as long as it maintains concentration.
Yeah, that's
Dragon has resistance to BPS while incorporeal. So
all BPS.
Yeah.
Not just non-magical BPS.
Yeah.
So your martial classes hate this thing.
It's going to be rough. But yeah, there's the Lunar Dragon's nice, and Solar Dragon is pretty solid as well. But I just have a soft spot for the old Lunar Dragon.
Yeah, it's cool. And I was like, okay, are there going to be dragons of any kind in space? Like, yes, of course. Like,
it has to be.
Star-based dragons. My personal favorite is, without question, the guy that ends the alphabet, Zodar.
Yes.
He's got some damage immunities on there. He's got some blindside, all kinds of condition immunities. AC 20, got some hit point, all that kind of stuff. He can fly and hover, floats around. But there's a couple very specific things that make him both interesting and terrifying because, listed is typically neutral. So this is not something that, if you see it, it's going to automatically attack you.
Right.
So you could encounter this thing as like all-knowing being. And then how you interact with it could determine whether it's a combat thing or maybe just a source of information for you.
Right.
It'd be a very interesting thing to encounter, is my point. Because disembodied voice...
So good.
Up to 3 times in its life, the
So
Zodar can cause a message of up to 25 words to issue from the air around it. It speaks only when it has something profoundly important to say. And the message can be understood by any creature that has an intelligence score of 2 or higher. I love that.
It is cool. It is very cool.
I'd be tempted to make him cover his ears here because... On the off chance that there's off chance, one of these days when I run a long campaign for us to give him a chance to play more than once every 2 years, for a one shot or something, I really want to have that kind of encounter with this creature. Like, I want to bring him into a campaign, like he shows up from another plane of existence.
Right.
See how the players interact with him, and maybe he follows them around for a little while, helps them with some really tough combats that'd be difficult for them by themselves.
Right.
And maybe he has something he finally says something before he either has to return to his home world or something.
Yes.
would be a great flavor thing to interact
42.
with. 42. And he's got legendary resistances, but then a couple other things. The Zodar can't be teleported or sent to any plane of existence against its will.
So no banishment.
So banishing, forced teleports of any kind, banishing smite, But on the other hand, he has a forced teleport.
Yes. So great.
Magically wraps a space around one creature can see within 60 feet of itself. Targets must make a DC 21 Constitution saving throw. It is Constitution, but for some players, that's a difficult save.
Yeah.
On the failed save, the target takes 4d10 force damage, and the Zodar teleports it along with any equipment it is wearing or carrying up to 60 feet to unoccupied space the Zodar can see, and they can support the target. On a successful save, target takes half as much damage and isn't teleported. But that's not the only thing. Wish! The Zodar casts the Wish spell, requiring no components, using Charisma as a casting spell. Spell save DC of 17. After casting this spell, the Zodar turns to dust and is destroyed.
It's literally Last Wish.
Again, I love everything about this.
It's so good.
This is easily one of my 10 favorite monsters I have seen in 5th edition, just from the way it's designed.
Yeah, it's great. I love it too.
It's so fantastic. I could go on and on about why this is great, but that's the Zodar. He's wonderful.
It's definitely I enjoy it a lot.
I imagine when he speaks, it's the artwork. He's like this very metallic looking, almost like haunted piece of armor floating around.
Yeah.
I imagine he just floats all over the place, just 3 inches off the ground.
Yes.
But when he talks, you think he's going to be some just deep barrel chested voice, and it's like the pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean. He just goes, "And so we shall come to war." And just to talk like that, it would be so fantastic.
Yeah.
Big metallic man talks in a really high pitched voice.
Yep. Played right into it.
Just played right into it. Anyway, that was my pick. Love the Zodar. He's fantastic.
You know what? I'm gonna give you. Go ahead, take one more pick, Alex. What's another monster you like from this book?
So okay, all right. If we're gonna do that, we'll be picking another one. That's fine. It's fine. The other one I did like when we were kind of going through this was the Rygar. It's a medium celestial creature, armor class of 19. It's got some skill proficiencies and things like that, which is interesting because on the armor class it has glory attached to it because part of its monster description is the Rygar's armor class includes its charisma modifier. That's why it has an AC of 19, which I find it because you look at it looks like a little small child or a teenager, with like the body build and everything, with like this trident and everything. But yeah, that's why it was the case. Why it's got that, because of the charisma. So very paladin-y in that aspect. It also wears a special equipment called a Talarith. It has this ability called Summon Golem. It's recharged after a short or long rest. Using its Talarith, the Rygar summons a golem-like duplicate of itself. The duplicate obeys the Rygar's command and uses the Rygar statistics, except that its unaligned construct that doesn't have a Talarith of its own. The duplicate takes its turn immediately after the Rygar. It vanishes after 1 hour when it's reduced to 0 hit points. So it can basically summon a clone of itself.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have from a CR8 to 2 CR8s all of a sudden, and that becomes a problem. It also does have some spells. Most of the spells are more RP based, light mage, champ reputation, but it does have Phantasmal Force and Dimension Door, Mass Suggestion, and Sending.
Uses, but yeah.
But I think again the interesting thing is just it's able to make a copy of a clone of itself.
That is, it's very interesting. It's very unique.
It's got a trident weapon attack, which you can attack with. It gets a little bonus force damage if it's wearing its Talarith, which is cool. And it also has a range spell attack of a Chromatic Bolt, which does 5d8 damage of the chosen type, cold, fire, lightning, or radiant damage. I figure it's going to be doing radiant most of the time there, with a plus 10 to hit, range of 90 feet. So it's a very, if this was a character you had, or be okay, it's versatile, does a little bit of everything, and it's got this cool ability to summon itself of a clone. It's pretty nifty.
I approve.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are just 3 of some of the interesting monsters on here. If you want to see more of those, let us know in the comments. Maybe we'll cover some more.
Sure.
If that's something that is interesting. And then lastly on here, we have the adventure. So I'll kind of go through this quickly because I don't want to do any spoilers for it. But I will say, this adventure, from the ones that I've read through, now I typically run my own campaigns just because I like to change things on the fly if I have to. And
that's our fault.
I feel like when I'm doing an adventure story, that I feel like I have to kind of railroad a little bit because there's an end to the adventure, right? So
right.
I feel like I'm trying to get people to the end. So I tend to go away from the adventures for the most part. But I will say one thing I really appreciate about this, especially for new DMs, is that it goes out of its way to give you alternative options if the party does something you weren't expecting normally.
Sure.
So it'll say, without any spoilers, it'll say, the party is going to do this, but if they go this way, this is what happens. Or if they continue to go that way, this is what else happens. And it's maybe something will come intervene to help get them back on track, to help you not get completely overwhelmed. What do I do? They're going the opposite direction.
Yeah, because if you're running an adventure guide, like Jameson said, it's designed to. There's a path.
Yeah.
There is a main path, and I think it's one of the hardest things for early DMs to kind of feel that balance of, even if you're using an adventure, which is a great way to start out as a first time DMing campaign, unless you're a madman. This guy, is figuring out, because you definitely don't want to just force your players down this path all the time, but you also don't want them out there taking the left fork of the left fork of the left fork, and they've done U-turn back on themselves because they just keep turning left over here. So that's a very difficult balance that a lot of people try to figure out as they go.
Right.
But yeah, this book does a better job of letting that happen a little bit with some options, but finding you a more smooth side rabbit trail that goes out for a little bit, that curves back in, doesn't have just a hard wall that forces them back.
Yeah, and it does it in such a way that it doesn't feel forced.
Right.
So, which I think is actually really well done in the way that they wrote a lot of these certain hooks for the different chapters. And they have it set up to it's going to be, they suggest to run it, I think, in 12 sessions for the whole thing. And they have at the end of every session, they suggest this is where you should end the session, and it has a cliffhanger. So every session they do it, and it gives you a cliffhanger. Like an
episode kind of thing.
So that it kind of gives that hook for, we should, play this again, which I think is cool that they did that. So I really do appreciate that as a DM. And the other thing is the way that they wrote it, they also gave alternatives, if you want to run this in your setting, how it would work in your world. Because the way Wild Space works, which is, space, in the Dungeons and Dragons setting, is it kind of is every universe, every world, planet, however you want to describe it, plane, whatever, has its own like bubble, and then you go out into space, and you're in wild space, which kind of like overlaps with the astral sea. So you can travel through space to another material plane, another universe. So they kind of have this like, you could go from like Sword Coast to like your homebrew world, and this is how you could do it, like in official way, which is cool that they did that.
Sure.
And allow it to be done. So like, if you're playing in a campaign and you know someone else who has another campaign group, you could have a way for your campaign groups to like come together in a unique way.
Find a common threat.
In actual official way to do that.
Yeah.
So that is cool that they have that option for stuff to happen. But again, I just really appreciate what they did with this adventure. It's probably one of my more favorite adventures on here. I did really enjoy Icewind Dale as well. That one is pretty well done, but I particularly like the way they did this. And it's a little bit not quite as serious as Icewind Dale is like borderline horror because it's like straight survival.
Yeah.
But this is a little bit more on the goofy side. I feel like not like ridiculous by any means,
no.
but I mean there's space hamsters and like space clowns and stuff.
It feels very Guardians of the Galaxy to me. Like there's definitely some level of goofiness to it,
there
but
can be. I mean,
in a good way.
You got hippo people, you know what I mean, like
and flying monkeys people.
Right. So there's a little bit of wonkiness on there.
Insect people, like
but it's not completely ridiculous either. So
and again, we're playing a fantasy RPG, so,
yeah. So
this wants a little sci-fi in its fantasy.
So all that being said, as a player, should you get Spelljammer in this set? Honestly, probably not. You could probably get away with.
You do what you want to do, but it's not a necessity or like a super impactful book like a Tasha's or a Xanathar's or something.
Even
like
a Volo's. I mean, maybe that. I mean, that had a little bit more options for characters, but it's again mostly for DMs.
Yeah, but there's a lot. There's more race options. There are just as many race options as there are here, and they're not as wild and out there. Even though they're more like monstrous races, there's no gliding and
But as a DM,
ooze people.
As a DM, I think it's actually very interesting. Even if you don't use the story, I think just by reading it, it's gonna help you with some kind of how to think things out ahead of time and maybe give you some ideas. Just reading through it was really interesting for me as a DM, even though I don't typically do adventures like I said. But yeah, it's definitely worth a look as a DM, I would say. As a player, I mean, if your DM gets it or a friend gets it, I mean, you can be like, hey, can I borrow the book so I can get one of these races, you know?
Yeah,
but,
it's worth a look-see.
Yeah.
If you know somebody who's got it by any means.
For sure. But yeah, I guess we'll keep it there. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you know when all of our new videos are coming out. Thanks for our sponsors, Hit Point Press. Check out their big bad bundles. Unique, cool monsters, history, lore, everything you need to throw these villains into your campaigns.
And it's a great way to get around your players that like to metagame, or if they do it accidentally, like I tend to do at times. Maybe they think they know what this monster is by the description. It creates some fun opportunities and unique things to throw at even your most experienced players would not see coming.
So check out the link in the description down below. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.